She thought she was stealing my power. She never knew what she was actually plugged into. She plugged into my power every single day, until one morning, her car revealed exactly where that outlet led.
The first time I saw the woman from the HOA using my outdoor outlet, I honestly thought it was a mistake. She was standing beside my driveway with a charging cable in her hand, and her electric car parked barely 10 feet from my garage. I opened my front door and called out, "Excuse me, can I help you?" She turned around like I had interrupted something she had every right to be doing. Then she smiled. "Oh, I'm just borrowing a little electricity." A little electricity. That was how she described plugging her expensive electric car into an outlet attached to my house. I told her that outlet was private property and asked her to unplug. She rolled her eyes. Then she said something that immediately told me this wasn't going to be a one-time problem. "We all pay HOA fees. You should be more neighborly." I watched her unplug the cable slowly before driving away. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning she was back. Same car, same cable, same outlet. And this time she didn't even knock. For the next several days, it became a routine. Every morning, she would pull into the edge of my driveway, plug in her car, and leave it charging for hours. I started noticing something strange whenever she did it. A faint clicking sound came from somewhere near the side of my house. Then my outdoor lights would flicker. Once the water pressure in my house suddenly dropped. I checked my electrical panel, but nothing looked wrong. That evening, I walked around the side of the house and noticed something I had never paid attention to before. A small utility panel sat behind a bush near the outlet. There was a warning label on it. I couldn't read the whole thing from where I was standing, but one word was clear: pump. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I looked back at the outlet. The same outlet Karen had been using every single morning. Suddenly, I had a very uncomfortable question. What exactly was that outlet powering? And why did the HOA woman seem so determined to keep using it? I decided not to confront her again. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and started investigating. Because if that little outlet was connected to something more important than I realized, Karen wasn't just stealing electricity. She might have been interfering with something that my entire property depended on. I stood there staring at that little panel for almost a minute. The word pump kept running through my mind. I knew there was a septic system somewhere on the property because the house had been built with 1 year before I bought it, but I had never connected that system to the outlet beside my garage. So I did what I should have done from the beginning. I followed the wiring. I shut off the breaker that controlled the outdoor outlet and watched the charging cable outside go completely dead. Then something strange happened. A low mechanical sound stopped at the exact same moment. Not from the garage, not from the house, from somewhere underground. I turned the breaker back on. The sound returned. That was enough to convince me this wasn't a normal outdoor outlet. The next morning, Karen showed up again, but this time I was waiting for her. She stepped out of her car, looked at the outlet, and immediately noticed that I was standing there. Her expression changed, just for a second. Then she smiled. "You don't mind if I charge for a little while, do you?" I asked her a simple question. "Why do you need my outlet every day?" She shrugged. "Because it's convenient." I looked at her car, then at the utility panel, then back at her. She suddenly became defensive. "You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be." That sentence bothered me more than anything else, because I hadn't told her what I had discovered. I hadn't mentioned the pump. I hadn't mentioned the underground sound. Yet she was already acting like she knew exactly what I was investigating. After she left, I called a local electrician. He came out that afternoon and inspected the wiring. He opened the panel, checked the outlet, then followed the line toward the side of the property. His expression slowly changed. He looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "This isn't just feeding an outlet." I asked him what it was connected to. He hesitated, then pointed toward the ground. "There's equipment underneath here." My stomach tightened. I asked what kind. He told me he couldn't confirm it without opening the access area. But there was one thing he could confirm. Karen's electric car had been drawing power from the same circuit that controlled the pump. I suddenly understood why my water pressure had been changing. I understood the clicking sound, and I understood why Karen kept coming back. But I still didn't know the biggest part. Why would an HOA board member knowingly connect her car to a circuit protecting my septic system? And what I discovered next would turn a simple power dispute into something much bigger. The electrician left my property just before sunset, but before he walked away, he gave me one final warning. Don't let anyone keep using that circuit until you know exactly what that pump is protecting. That sentence stayed with me. I disconnected the outdoor outlet completely and locked the small utility panel. For the first time in days, I felt like I had control of my own property again. Then Karen arrived. She pulled into the street slowly. She didn't drive toward the outlet. She stopped across from my driveway and simply stared at the lock panel. That was when I knew. She already knew. I walked toward her car. You've been using that outlet for weeks. She lowered her window. I told you, it's just electricity. No, I said, it's connected to a pump. Her expression changed instantly. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Fear. Then she recovered. I have no idea what you're talking about. I asked her why she knew exactly where the utility panel was. She didn't answer. Instead, she started talking about HOA rules. She said homeowners were required to provide reasonable access to shared utilities. I told her my property wasn't a community charging station. She became angry. Then she said something that completely changed the situation. You don't understand what that system does. I asked her to explain. She refused. Then she drove away. That night, I searched through every document I had received when I bought the house. Property records, utility diagrams, old inspection reports. And then I found something. A faded site plan showing the underground septic system. The pump line ran directly beneath the driveway, but there was another line marked beside it. It wasn't part of the original house plans. It appeared to have been added years later. I zoomed in on the document. The line continued beyond my property boundary. It went toward the HOA-maintained section of the neighborhood. My stomach dropped. Someone had modified the system, and if that modification was connected to the circuit Karen had been using, then she wasn't simply stealing my electricity. She might have been using my property to power something that benefited the entire HOA. The next morning, I checked the mailbox. There was an envelope waiting for me. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of an old HOA maintenance agreement. One sentence had been highlighted. The community was responsible for maintaining a shared drainage and wastewater system. I read it twice. Then I looked at the date. The agreement had been signed before I bought the house. But the system was running through my property. And suddenly I understood why Karen had been so desperate to keep that outlet available. She wasn't charging her car for free. She was hiding a much bigger secret. And someone on the HOA board had been counting on me never finding it. The next morning, I made one decision. I wasn't going to confront Karen again. I was going to find proof. I called the county records office and requested every document connected to property. Several hours later, I received something that changed everything. There was an old easement recorded against my land, but it wasn't mentioned anywhere in the paperwork I received when I purchased the house. The easement gave access to underground utility infrastructure running beneath my driveway. I stared at the document. Then I looked at the date. It had been created years before I bought the property. But there was something even stranger. The easement wasn't for electricity. It was for wastewater and drainage equipment. I immediately called the electrician back. I showed him the document. He looked at it and then asked me something that made my stomach drop. Do you know where that pump actually sends the wastewater? I told him I didn't. He pulled up the site plan. The underground line didn't stop at my property. It continued toward a drainage facility maintained by the HOA. Suddenly, Karen's daily charging made sense. She wasn't just looking for a free outlet. She was using a circuit that supplied power to equipment connected to the community's drainage system. But why would her car need that circuit? The answer came when I checked the electrical readings. Every time her vehicle was charging, the pump was losing power. That explained the strange clicking, the water pressure problems, and the warnings I had been seeing. Karen wasn't simply taking electricity. Her car was drawing enough power from the circuit to interfere with a critical pump. And if that pump stopped working during heavy rain, the wastewater system could back up. I realized something terrifying. The HOA had been gambling with my property, and Karen knew it. I called the HOA president and asked him one simple question. Why is community wastewater equipment connected to my private electrical circuit? There was silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. That system predates your ownership. I replied, that's not an answer. He hung up. That was when I knew I had them. Because people don't hang up when they have nothing to hide. They hang up when they realize you found something they hoped you'd never discover. I went back outside. I looked at the lock panel, then at the underground line. For the first time, I understood the real reason Karen had been so desperate to keep charging her car. She wasn't stealing my power because she was cheap. She was keeping the HOA's secret alive. And now I had the documents to prove it. The next morning, I had everything I needed. The easement, the electrical records, the site plan, and proof that the circuit Karen had been using was connected to equipment serving the HOA's shared wastewater system. But I still needed one final piece. Proof that Karen knew. So I contacted the county inspector and asked him to inspect the system. He arrived that afternoon. We opened the access area and followed the wiring. Everything matched the documents. The pump was connected to the same circuit as my outdoor outlet. Then the inspector found something else. A modification had been made to the system years earlier. Someone had installed an additional connection that allowed the HOA's equipment to draw power through my property. And the record showed who had approved the modification. The HOA board. I couldn't believe it. Karen hadn't accidentally discovered my outlet. She had been using a system the HOA had quietly relied on for years. Then the inspector checked the electrical readings from the previous days. Every time Karen charged her car, the pump's available power dropped. That meant her daily charging wasn't harmless. It was interfering with the system itself. I gave every document to the county. Then I sent copies to the HOA board. This time nobody hung up. The emergency HOA meeting was held 3 days later. Karen walked into that room, expecting me to be the problem. Instead, she found the county inspector sitting beside me. I placed the easement on the table, then the electrical records, then the maintenance agreement. Finally, I showed them the charging logs. Karen stared at the papers. Her confidence disappeared. The HOA president tried to explain that the arrangement had existed for years. The inspector interrupted him. Existing doesn't mean legal. The room went completely silent. The county ordered the HOA to disconnect its equipment from my private electrical system and repair the infrastructure properly. Karen was also ordered to stop using my outlet and reimburse the electricity costs and damage caused by the unauthorized connection. But the best part wasn't the money. It was watching her realize that the outlet she thought she could use whenever she wanted had never belonged to her. She had spent weeks treating my property like community property. And in the end, the documents proved one simple thing. It was mine. The HOA had the responsibility. Karen had the entitlement. But I had the deed. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can have in an HOA fight isn't a threat. It's proof. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe to HOA Reality 365 and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.